Welcome to this film recap of the highly anticipated sci-fi romance, Passengers from 2016, starring Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt. This movie takes us on a journey through space as two passengers aboard the Avalon spaceship awaken 90 years too early from their hibernation pods. With the fate of the ship and their own lives in their hands, they embark on a thrilling adventure filled with mystery, love, and survival. So sit back, grab some popcorn, and get ready for a spoiler-filled journey into the world of Passengers. Once upon a time, in the vast expanse of space, a magnificent interstellar spaceship known as the Avalon could be seen gliding through the stars. Its destination was a colonized world called Homestead 2. The vessel was on autopilot, and all its quarters were empty, with its 258 crew members and 5,000 passengers in deep hibernation. As the ship ventured through the vastness of space, it suddenly encountered an asteroid belt. The impact weakened the ship's shields, causing power to be diverted to the main shield. Just when it seemed like all was lost, a massive asteroid appeared before the ship, putting it on a collision course. In a moment of crisis, the asteroid smashed into the ship, causing various malfunctions and damage to the vessel. The ship sprang into action, initiating its self-repair systems. Suddenly, one of the hibernation pods activated, awakening a passenger by the name of Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer. Jim was greeted by an automated system that helped him with his awakening, informing him that he had spent 120 years in suspended animation and that the ship was only 4 months away from its destination, Homestead 2. He was told that he would be able to spend that time enjoying the luxurious aspects of the ship and was given instructions about his ID band, cabin, and activities he was to take part in prior to arrival on the planet. Excited and nervous, Jim got ready and ventured out of his cabin, walking into an automated class meant for an entire learning group. He appeared a little anxious as the hologram explained the situation on Earth, calling it overpopulated, overpriced, and overrated. And so begins Jim's journey of discovery, isolation, and adventure on the interstellar spaceship Avalon, as it makes its way towards Homestead 2. Jim Preston was filled with confusion as the automated system told him to hold his questions until the end of the lesson, but his curiosity got the best of him. He kept asking why he was the only one awake and soon realized that the hologram couldn't answer his questions. Determined to find answers, Jim set out on a journey to find other people. He made his way to the main concourse of the ship, but to his disappointment, no one was there. An automated informational desk offered to help, but Jim wanted to speak to a real person. The desk directed him to a steward, but when he arrived, he found that no one was there either. Undeterred, Jim asked to speak to the captain and made his way to the bridge. Although he didn't have access to go inside, he could see that none of the main crew was awake. He eventually made his way to the observatory, where he discovered that the ship was actually 90 years away from its destination, Homestead 2. The realization that he had awakened too soon hit him like a ton of bricks, and he rushed back to the concourse to send a message back to Earth, asking for guidance on what to do next. The communication system informed him that the call to Earth would take approximately 55 years to receive a response, leaving Jim devastated. He wandered aimlessly through the ship until he stumbled upon the bar, where he saw another person. As he talked to the bartender, something seemed strange about him. When he went to get him a drink, Jim realized that he was an android, and it introduced itself as Arthur. Jim was left to grapple with his newfound solitude, 90 years away from civilization, with only an android bartender for company. The journey of self-discovery and isolation had only just begun for Jim, as he explored the vastness of space aboard the interstellar spaceship Avalon. Jim was eager to learn more from the android bartender, Arthur, but he couldn't even explain how it was possible for him to be awake ahead of time. The next day, he woke up in his cabin and made his way to the cantina, where he soon realized that most of the things on the menu were reserved for gold-class passengers only. He settled for a plain coffee and tried to figure out how to fix his hibernation chamber. After gathering all the necessary tools, Jim managed to get the chamber operational and lay down inside the pod, but to his disappointment, nothing happened. He then decided to use the tools to get into the crew's hibernation chambers, but that didn't work either. Small malfunctions began to occur around the ship. Jim kept returning to the bar, mostly to talk to Arthur, who gave him some advice that convinced him to break into one of the gold classrooms and try to have some fun on the ship. He tried all the restaurants, games, and entertainment system, but as time passed, he became even more miserable, trapped in his solitude. One day, after drinking too much, Jim stumbled upon the hibernation pods and wandered into an airlock with spacesuits designed for spacewalks. He put on a suit, went to the airlock, and pushed the lever and button to release the airlock door. Jim was mesmerized as he stepped outside the ship into the vast expanse of space. He was the only conscious human being experiencing that moment in time, and as he released the magnets on his boots and floated in the void, he felt a sense of devastation. He returned inside, took off the suit, but went back to the airlock without it on, ready to end it all. But in the last moment, he changed his mind, ran back inside, and stumbled upon a bottle, falling to the ground. As he stood up, his gaze was drawn to a woman in one of the hibernation pods, named Aurora. He searched for her files in the directory and listened to her passenger interview, becoming enamored with her. Later, he was seen sitting next to her pod, still listening to her interviews. Back in the bar, he read some of her work and talked to Arthur about her writing. Jim was consumed by the irony of this situation. He had left Earth in search of a better life, only to awaken too soon and find himself stranded on the ship. He had found his perfect woman, only for her to be out of reach. He couldn't shake the thought of waking her up, but he knew that if he did, he would be stranding her there with him to die on the ship. At first, he decided against it, but as time went by, he couldn't let it go, until one day he changed his mind. He went to her pod and managed to activate it. As she was waking up and going through the same process as he did, he hid and went back to his room. Jim went to the main concourse, hoping to find Aurora, and there she was, just as confused as he was a year ago. He told her they were the only ones awake and took her to the observatory, where he explained that he couldn't access the crew or the main commands of the ship. Aurora freaked out and wanted to get back into her hibernation pod, but when they got there, Jim had to break the news that there was no special equipment on the ship that could help them return to hibernation, effectively stranding them on the ship. They returned to the concourse, and Jim told her to rest since she had just come out of hibernation. Feeling sorry for him, having to spend more than a year alone on the ship, she went to bed. Jim went back to the bar, regretful about what he had done, and asked Arthur not to tell Aurora that he was the one who woke her up. The next day, Aurora woke up and went back to the concourse to ask the automated info desk about the hibernation pods. Jim joined her, and they went to get breakfast. As they left, the info desk experienced some sort of malfunction. In the cantina, Aurora realized that Jim had been eating the same breakfast for more than a year and got him one of the gold-class menus. They talked about the possibility of fixing the pods, but unlike Jim, Aurora wasn't ready to give up. She searched through the infirmary and went through research documents, eventually ending up at the crew's hibernation quarters, trying to break the doors open. Jim noticed more malfunctions throughout the ship, but Aurora's determination and spirit remained strong. As time passed, Aurora grew more and more aware of her situation on the Avalon and began to lament about her life on the ship. She wrote, jogged around the ship, and swam in the pool, trying to find ways to cope with the reality of their situation. One day, she went to the cantina to interview Jim, thinking his story might be interesting. She asked why he immigrated to the colony, and although Jim answered with slogans from the company at first, he eventually shared his true hopes of building a life and being someone on the new world. Later, in the observatory, Aurora finally shared her reason for being on the ship. Unlike the other passengers, she had a round-trip ticket, and her idea was to go to Homestead too, live there for a year, and return to Earth as the first journalist to write the greatest story ever told. As Aurora slowly lost hope in finding a way to fix their predicament, Jim figured out a way to cheer her up. He took her dancing, to the cinema, to the basketball court, and finally to the bar to meet Arthur. Although she relaxed for a while, she eventually remembered their situation, leaving Jim feeling awful about what he had done to her. The next moment, he was seen tinkering with something. And in another, Aurora walked into the observatory to find a miniature of the Chrysler building that Jim had made for her. Sometime later, they went on a date at the bar, sharing stories about their lives and the experiences that brought them to the Avalon. Aurora told Jim about her father's death when she was a teenager, and after dinner, Jim took her on a spacewalk, where they explored the vastness of space together. For the first time in over 100 years, Jim had someone to share the magnificent experience of space with, as he and Aurora floated together, switching off the magnets on their boots. The two of them were immediately drawn to each other and retreated to his cabin, where they slept together for the first time. As they started living like a couple, Aurora moved into Jim's cabin and wrote about her life on the ship. They jogged, ate, and slept together, and Jim even explored the ship further, finding the hydroponics bay, where he brought her flowers. One day, as the ship passed by a red giant, they went to the observatory to see it, and later that night, they celebrated Aurora's birthday in one of the ship's many restaurants in the bar. While Jim went to the washroom to prepare the ring he had made for her, Aurora chatted with Arthur, who unknowingly told her that Jim had intentionally awoken her from hibernation. When Jim returned, Aurora confronted him in absolute disbelief, and she ran away, furious and panicked. Jim came back to his cabin to find that all of her things were gone, and the next day, when he tried to speak to her in the cantina, she ran away once again. Desperate and unable to forgive Jim for taking her life, Aurora one night went to his cabin, punching and kicking him, wanting to kill him. Jim tried to apologize and explain his actions over the comm, telling her that he had fallen in love with her. But Aurora didn't care. No matter how much he tried, she couldn't forgive him for what he had done. As the night descended upon the ship, Jim found himself faced with yet another malfunction. The interstellar spaceship Avalon, on its way to Homestead 2, suddenly faced a critical error, and the main command shut down. Puzzled, Jim took the elevator, only to have that too malfunction. Meanwhile, in the main concourse, Aurora was marveling at the sight of a tree that Jim had planted there, but her excitement was short-lived as she soon realized that the food dispensary in the cantina was also malfunctioning. Just then, they heard the voice of the deck chief, Gus Mancuso, over the comms, inquiring about the origin of the tree. The two of them rushed to the concourse, where they were introduced to Mancuso. They told him about the situation, and he was shocked to learn that 3 hibernation pods had failed. Mancuso took them to the bridge, where he discovered that there was something wrong with the ship and that the information on the systems had to be checked manually. Just as they were leaving the bridge, a robot almost fell on their heads, and they informed Mancuso of the frequent malfunctions happening all over the ship. He showed them how to collect the data, but as he checked on the pods, Jim joined him and figured out what happened with Aurora's pod. The deck chief was horrified by what Jim had done, and as he checked the collected data, Aurora joined him on the bridge. They talked about what happened with her pod, but Mancuso told her that he couldn't do anything about it. Just then, Jim walked in with the 16th broken robot. Mancuso, who was feeling the effects of hibernation sickness, went to rest. But as he walked out, he coughed out blood. The situation was dire, and Jim and Aurora found themselves in a race against time to save themselves and the ship. The night was still and quiet, but Aurora couldn't seem to find any rest, so she made her way to the pool for a swim. As she was floating in the water, suddenly the ship was hit by a massive loss in gravity, and she found herself being pulled down by the water. Struggling to stay afloat, she managed to make it to the surface just in time before the gravity drive reset. As she caught her breath, she noticed Jim running towards her, and they both headed to find Mancuso. Once they were all back on the bridge, they began to unravel the mystery of what had been happening to the ship. Mancuso pieced together that something had gone wrong 2 years prior, taking out a crucial system. They needed to find the cause and fix it, or the entire ship would be stranded. However, as they set out to find the problem, Mancuso suddenly fainted, and Jim and Aurora had to take him to the infirmary. There they learned that he was dying, and there was nothing that could be done to stop it. A short time later, the 3 of them gathered in the observatory, and Mancuso passed his ID bracelet to Jim, entrusting him to fix the ship. And with those final words, Mancuso took his last breath. As they mourned his loss, the ship was hit by another failure, causing the lights to turn red and the ship to shake. Jim told Aurora that they needed to work together and make their way to engineering. But as they ran towards their destination, they encountered another failure in the gravity drive. And as if things couldn't get any worse, Arthur, the android, was also affected by the malfunction. With a heavy heart, Jim deactivated him. Finally, they arrived in engineering, and as they searched for the source of the problem, they stumbled upon the power plant. As they opened the hatch, the asteroid had caused a breach in the hull, and Aurora was suddenly sucked in. Jim tried to hold on, but he too was pulled in. Clinging desperately to the hatch, he watched as it slowly closed on him. As Jim and Aurora worked to save the ship, they faced one obstacle after another. They managed to seal the first breach, but then Jim discovered that there was more than one. They followed the trajectory of the meteor and found that it had hit the reactor control computer. With a plan in mind, Jim thought he could find replacement parts for it, and they eventually did. But even after changing the part, the process of venting the reactor still failed. So they did it manually, but it failed again. Jim came up with a new plan and figured out that he needed to open the vent door from outside of the ship to cool down the reactor. As he was getting ready to go out, he gave Aurora Mancuso's bracelet just in case he didn't make it back. With a heavy heart, she helped him with his suit, and as he walked into the airlock, she told him to come back because she couldn't live on the ship without him. Back in the reactor room, the temperature was at critical heights and a bolt from the reactor propelled into Aurora's arm. Meanwhile, Jim was getting closer to the vent from the outside and saw the door. The temperature kept rising in the reactor room as he tried to bypass the vent door to open it. He soon realized that he would have to manually hold the door open so the reactor could vent. He told Aurora about his plan, but she didn't like it. They argued, but he told her that they had to save the other people, and she reluctantly vented the reactor. As Jim floated away from the ship, his tether snapped and the pressure in his suit rapidly dropped. In a panic, he called out to Aurora, who raced to find another suit. She was able to fly out to save him, but her own tether proved too short. Just as all hope seemed lost, she grasped onto Jim's tether and managed to bring him back to the safety of the ship. When they reached the infirmary, Aurora's heart sank when she realized that Jim had already passed away. But with Mancuso's bracelet in hand, she was able to override the medical protocols and bring Jim back to life. Overcome with emotion, she forgave Jim, and the two of them, along with the android Arthur, gave Mancuso a proper space burial. Jim then took Aurora to the infirmary and revealed that he had discovered a way to use the medical pods as hibernation pods. He suggested that she get inside and sleep through the rest of the journey, but she declined and chose to stay awake on the ship with Jim. The two of them lived out their lives together on the Avalon, and when they finally arrived on Homestead 2, 88 years later, the crew was shocked to find the ship in an unexpected state. Aurora left a message for the crew, recounting the story of her and Jim's life together on the ship while everyone else was asleep. It was a story of love, bravery, and the unbreakable bond that two people can forge in even the most trying of circumstances. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay on top of all the latest recap and never miss a beat. Thank you for watching.